If you think about how history um, physically accumulates over time, it's so tempting to imagine it as this neatly stacked geological record.
Right, like a layer cake.
Exactly. Like you have your modern asphalt on top, you dig down a few feet to hit some Victorian plumbing, maybe a layer of medieval cobblestones below that.
And eventually, you just hit ancient bedrock.
Yeah. But history rarely has the decency to be that organized. When you actually look closely, the past operates much more like a corrupted hard drive.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, I mean, old files get overwritten, or they get fragmented and tangled up with new data. It creates this chaotic, completely entangled mess that is almost impossible to parse.
And nowhere is that corrupted hard drive more evident than urban archaeology. I mean, the moment you introduce human ambition and limited real estate, the neat layers just vanish.
They really do.
You get centuries of architecture literally crashing into each other.
Which is exactly what brings us to our deep dive today on the Caelian Hill in Rome. We are taking a massive stack of sources. I'm talking tourist guides to the Roman houses, deep archaeological reports, liturgical encyclopedias.
A lot of heavy reading for this one.
Oh, tons of historical analyses. And we're using all of it to untangle one of the most bizarre historical anomalies on the planet.
It's a wild ride.
It is. We are peeling back the literal and figurative layers beneath this one specific hill to figure out how a midnight execution of 2 Roman martyrs somehow manipulated ancient urban development.
And completely rewrote European liturgy, by the way.
Yes, and then eventually became the geographical anchor for the Pied Piper of Hamelin.
It's a dizzying trajectory. To really grasp it, try to visualize the physical space we're dealing with here.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So imagine standing in a sunlit, towering 4th century basilica in Rome, right? And then descending beneath its floorboards into the dim, frescoed remains of a multi-story pagan apartment block.
Wow, quite the contrast.
And then watch as the historical echo of that very specific foundation stretches hundreds of miles north, centuries later, to manifest in the foggy cobblestone streets of a medieval German village.
Man, that's cinematic. Let's start with the narrative that set this whole chain reaction in motion, though. The story of Sts.John and Paul.
And just to be clear up front, these are not the biblical apostles.
Right. Good clarification. We're talking about 2 Roman military officers, and their traditional hagiography reads like a late antique political thriller.
It really does.
According to the legend, John and Paul serve as high-ranking stewards for Constantia. She's the daughter of the Emperor Constantine the Great.
A very powerful household to be in.
Definitely. And when she dies, she leaves them her immense fortune. But instead of living lavishly, they retire to their massive estate on the Caelian Hill and start quietly giving all their money away to the poor.
Which, in the middle of the 4th century, was a deeply radical use of aristocratic wealth.
Really? How so?
Well, it was a total rejection of the Roman civic expectation. The idea that wealth should be used for public prestige, like funding games or big monuments.
Right. So they basically opt out of the system. But the system doesn't like that very much.
Not at all.
So in 361 AD, Julian the Apostate takes the imperial throne. And Julian is famous for wanting to aggressively reverse the Christianization of Rome.
He wants to reinstate the classical pagan gods.
Exactly. So he demands John and Paul abandon their philanthropy and return to his court. They refuse. So Julian issues this strict 10-day ultimatum.
Ticking clock.
Literally. And when that deadline expires at midnight, an imperial officer named Terentianus arrives at their Caelian Hill home carrying a small statue of the god Jupiter.
It's such a dramatic detail.
It is. He gives them a simple choice. Worship the statue or die. They refuse, so Terentianus has them secretly beheaded right there in their own hallway.
Just brutal.
Yeah, and to hide the crime, he buries them under their own floorboards. The date is recorded as June 26, 362 AD.
But hold on, if we pause and actually look at the biological and historical math here, this hagiography starts to crack under its own weight pretty fast.
Yeah, let's unpack this because the math does not add up at all.
No, it doesn't.
I mean, Constantia died around 354 AD. And her father, Constantine, died in 337. So if John and Paul were already mature, high-ranking stewards running an estate back in the 330s.
Right. How are they still prime targets for Julian's military draft a quarter century later?
Exactly. Biologically, they'd be senior citizens by 362. And furthermore, Julian the Apostate's entire political strategy relied on, explicitly not making Christian martyrs.
Yeah, he knew blood fueled the Christian movement. He didn't want to give them heroes.
Right. He preferred economic warfare, stripping Christians of teaching positions and social ranks. He wasn't orchestrating secret midnight executions in the capital.
The timeline absolutely doesn't hold up. What historians and researchers suggest, like the Bollandist scholars who specifically specialize in critically dismantling these saints' lives.
Oh, the Bollandists are ruthless. I love it.
They are. They suggest that we are looking at a retrofitted memory here. What's fascinating here is that there likely was a real martyrdom on this site, but it almost certainly happened decades earlier.
During the Great Persecution of Diocletian, right, around 304 AD.
Exactly. That was a time when domestic, brutal executions were actually quite common. But if you jump forward to the late 5th century, the Roman Church is navigating intense political friction with the state.
So they needed a story.
They needed a compelling, localized narrative about Christian civil servants who prioritized divine law over an apostate emperor's mandates.
So they basically took the buried memory of these Diocletian-era martyrs, updated the villains to be Julian's guys, and rebranded it as anti-Julian propaganda.
That's the most likely scenario, yes.
But, okay, even if we accept that the church gave the story an ideological upgrade to serve 5th century politics, there is still a massive physical anomaly here.
A huge one.
And it revolves around where these bodies actually ended up. Because Roman law, specifically the ancient law of the 12 Tables, was incredibly strict about human remains.
Oh, very strict.
You absolutely could not bury a body inside the pomerium, the sacred municipal boundary of Rome.
It was one of the ultimate taboos. And it wasn't just about religious purity either. It was a matter of basic urban hygiene.
Because the city was just so dense.
Right, exactly. Burying the dead among living was a major public health risk. That's why all the famous early Christian catacombs, San Callisto, San Sebastiano, they're situated out in the suburbs along the Appian Way.
Right. Almost every martyr we know of was buried legally outside the walls. Yet the archaeological evidence, backed up by ancient liturgical texts like the 6th century Sacramentarium Leonianum.
Great pronunciation, by the way.
Hey, thanks. I practiced. But that text actually marvels at the fact that John and Paul were buried intramuros, inside the walls.
In the very heart of the city.
It's wild.
To the early Christian community, having martyrs successfully interred inside a domestic residence wasn't just a quirky historical footnote. It was a profound symbol.
A symbol of what, exactly?
It representing Christianity basically bypassing the state apparatus and physically reclaiming the sacred geography of Rome from the inside out. The domestic space itself had become sacred ground.
Okay, but if burying bodies inside the city walls was such a massive legal and social crime, they couldn't just erect a marble tombstone in the courtyard and call it a day. Right, they had to hide it.
Oh, definitely. They had to keep it secret.
So what does a 4th century architectural cover-up actually look like? Because if you walk up the Caelian Hill today, you don't see an ancient Roman house.
No, you see the massive Basilica of Santi Giovanni a Fallo. But the key to this whole mystery is what lies directly beneath its nave.
And for centuries, nobody really knew what was down there. I mean, in the 19th century, writers like Charlotte Ann Eaton popularized these wildly romantic Gothic rumors that the vaults beneath the church were vivaria.
The animal dens?
Yeah. Subterranean animal dens used to hold tigers and bears for the Colosseum, which is just down the street.
It's a very dramatic image, but architecturally and logistically, it makes zero sense.
Right, who's hauling wild apex predators up a residential hill?
Exactly. And in 1887, the rector of the Basilica, Father Germano, finally decided to test these theories by just grabbing a shovel and excavating beneath his own church floor.
Good for him. And he didn't find iron cages, did he?
He did not. He unearthed over 20 rooms of perfectly preserved domestic life.
It's basically a 400-year hyperspeed gentrification cycle frozen in time. Archaeologists call it the Casa Romana del Telio. And mapping the phases of this site is literally like tracking the economic heartbeat of ancient Rome.
It really is.
Let's look at phase 1. We're in the 2nd century. The property starts as a luxury, 2-story suburban domus, a single-family villa with a private, fully equipped bathhouse.
Which reflects the peak of the Pax Romana. Wealthy aristocrats enjoyed expansive, high-end living with space to spare.
Right. Then we hit phase 2 in the 3rd century. The Roman economy starts to wobble. We hit the crisis of the 3rd century, urbanization explodes, and space becomes a huge premium.
So what happened?
The aristocratic domus is entirely transformed into an insula, a dense working-class apartment block. Developers come in, they chop up the ground floor into commercial shops facing the street, and build small rental flats on the upper levels.
So the neighborhood transitions from quiet luxury to dense, noisy, commercial urban sprawl. But real estate cycles always loop, don't they?
They always loop. Which brings us to phase 3, late 3rd to early 4th century. A single wealthy owner, perhaps our legendary stewards, John and Paul, swoops in, buys the entire commercial block, knocks out walls, combines the apartment units with the remains of the old villa, and engineers a mega mansion.
Talk about a renovation project.
Seriously. Then finally, phase 4, late 4th century. The empire is Christianizing, and parts of this mega mansion are quietly converted into a domus ecclesiae.
A Christian house church.
Right, centered directly over the secret graves of our martyrs.
And because of this constant overwriting, walking through the excavation today is just a surreal visual experience. You'll enter what archaeologists call the Hall of False Marbles.
Oh, I love this room.
It's so clever. In the 4th century, the owner wanted the aesthetic of a luxury mansion, but solid marble paneling opus sectile was prohibitively expensive.
So they faked it.
They faked it. They hired painters to meticulously faux paint the plaster to mimic the veins and cuts of imported stone.
So even ancient Romans were doing the fake it till you make it DIY renovations.
Absolutely. It's an ancient economic workaround. But the room that truly captures the psychological state of Rome at this time is the Sala dell'Orante, the Hall of the Prayer.
Okay, describe this for us because it's fascinating.
On the wall, there is an immaculate fresco of an Orante. It's a Christian female figure standing with her arms outstretched in the traditional posture of prayer. But she isn't surrounded by crosses or biblical scenes. No, she is entirely framed by classical pagan imagery. Theatrical masks, mythological marine monsters, classical floral motifs.
It's an incredible cultural mashup. Why combine those two completely distinct visual languages?
Because it's a snapshot of a society hedging its bets. We often think of the transition from paganism to Christianity as like a sudden flip of a switch.
Right, like one day everyone just woke up and changed their minds.
But in reality, it was a messy, overlapping century where families stood with one foot in the classical traditions they grew up with and one foot in a rapidly emerging new faith. The imagery isn't contradictory to them, it's transitional.
Okay, but this brings up a massive logistical question for me. Rome was notoriously prone to being sacked, burned, rebuilt.
Constantly.
So if this sprawling, multi-story underground complex was so culturally significant, how did it survive the centuries? Like, why didn't medieval developers just bulldoze the ruins to build something else?
Well, it survived entirely by accident thanks to the architectural ingenuity of a Roman senator named Pammachius in 398 AD.
What did he do?
He wanted to honor the martyrs by building a grand basilica on the site. But instead of leveling the Roman houses to clear a plot, he decided to build the church directly on top of them.
Wait, on top?
Yeah. His engineers used the sturdy, load-bearing brick walls of the insula and the mega mansion as the foundational support grid for the church above.
So they essentially used a Roman apartment building as the basement for a cathedral.
Exactly. They filled several of the lower residential rooms to the ceiling with soil to handle the massive weight of the basilica's nave. And in the process of burying it to support the new structure, they created a perfect archaeological seal.
That is brilliant.
The new church carried his legal title deed, becoming known as the Titulus Pammache.
The structural integrity of that is just staggering. I mean, that basilica absorbed the shock of the Visigoths sacking Rome in 410 AD. It withstood the devastating Norman sack in 1084.
It's a tank.
It really is. Today, if you walk in, it's widely known as the Church of the Chandeliers, due to its spectacular lighting. But its physical resilience is only half the story.
Right, because what happened liturgically inside that building changed the cultural fabric of Europe.
Yeah, the influence of John and Paul just skyrocketed. They didn't remain local folk heroes. The church integrated them into the absolute core of Roman Catholic worship.
Their names were permanently added to the Roman Canon, which is Eucharistic prayer there.
That's a huge deal.
It meant every single day, priests across the known world were invoking their names alongside heavyweights like Peter and Paul. They were elevated to celestial protectors of Rome.
And that reputation travels fast. By 507 AD, the Frankish king Clovis is gearing up for the Battle of Vouillé against the Visigoths.
A major conflict.
Huge. And before the battle, he claims he was guided to victory by a miraculous streaming pillar of light, a phenomenon he firmly credited to the intervention of Sts.John and Paul.
So they went from being quietly executed under a Roman floorboard to dictating the outcomes of royal European battlefields.
It's a masterful piece of cultural transmission. But how that transmission eventually warped over time, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, this is the wildest part.
It is. Because their influence didn't just stay in the lofty realms of royal warfare and papal liturgy. The feast day of these two Roman martyrs, June 26th, inexplicably becomes the calendar anchor for one of the darkest, most enduring fairy tales in Western history.
How does a Roman real estate dispute connect to the Pied Piper of Hamelin? It sounds impossible.
Right. On the surface, jumping from a basilica in Italy to a folklore tragedy in Germany feels entirely disconnected. But you have to understand the mechanics of how medieval society processed and recorded time.
Let's look at the primary evidence from Hamelin. It's a town in Lower Saxony. The core of the Pied Piper myth isn't just an oral fairy tale. It's literally etched into the town's historical record.
Yeah, the Lüneburg manuscript and a famous 1602 inscription on the side of the rat catcher's house state the exact details.
And what do they say?
On June 26, 1284, explicitly noted as the feast of Sts.John and Paul, 130 children born in Hamelin were led out of the town by a piper wearing multicolored clothes. They passed the Calvary near the Koppen and just vanished.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the key to unlocking this isn't the magic pipe, it's the date.
Right.
Medieval citizens did not navigate their year using a standardized secular calendar. You wouldn't say, hey, let's meet on June 26th. You anchored your entire life to the liturgical rhythm of the saints.
So if a massive community-shattering trauma occurs, you don't write down the numerical date. You burn the memory into the feast day it happened on.
Exactly. The Pied Piper legend is almost universally understood by historians to be a mythicized representation of a real historical demographic trauma that struck Hamelin squarely on the feast of Saints John and Paul.
Now, people always jump to the Black Death when they hear about the rats and the Piper story, but we know the math on that doesn't work out.
No, not at all. The plague hit Europe in the late 1340s, which is over 6 decades after the highly specific 1284 date.
So what actually happened to these 130 kids?
The most historically sound mechanism is the Aussiedlung, the massive 13th century eastward migration. During this period, there was a heavy campaign to colonize territories in Eastern Europe. And the people organizing this didn't just put up posters, they hired professional recruiters known as locators.
And how did these locators actually operate? Because they managed to convince an entire generation to abandon their families.
They operated through deep economic incentives and really flashy marketing. The multicolored clothes mentioned in the Piper legend weren't magical garments. No, they were likely the bright heraldic livery of the nobles funding the expedition, or just flamboyant outfits designed to draw a crowd in a drab town square. They would literally drum up an audience sometimes with an actual piper.
Oh, wow. That makes so much sense.
Right. In medieval Europe, primogeniture meant the oldest son inherited the land. Younger siblings had zero economic prospects.
So the locators would pitch them a dream. Come with me to the east and you'll own your own prime real estate.
Exactly. The youth signed contracts and marched out of town. And to the parents left behind, watching a charismatic stranger lead their children away to a distant land, those kids were truly lost forever.
The psychological impact of that is devastating. And it fundamentally alters the way we read the Piper tale. It's not just a spooky story about kidnapping, it's a morality tale about a broken contract.
So?
Well, think about it. In the story, the town hires the piper to handle a problem. He fulfills his end of the bargain. The town refuses to pay him, so he forecloses on their future, their children.
I see.
In a medieval society, civic trust and the keeping of oaths were the only things holding a community together. If you break a contract, the societal architecture collapses.
The trauma of that broken trust was so severe it literally rewrote the town's geography. Hamelin has a street called Bungelosenstrasse, the street without drums.
Oh, I've heard of this.
It is historically identified as the last place the children were seen walking. To this very day, playing music or dancing on that specific street is strictly forbidden. The town enforces a ritualized absence of sound to carry the weight of that day.
That is heavy. And bringing this all back to our Roman martyrs, there's a final twist to how John and Paul were absorbed into European culture. Because their feast day fell in late June, right after the summer solstice, they evolved beyond their roles as Roman civil servants or protectors of the capital.
They became Wetterherr and weather saints.
Which is such a weird pivot.
It is. But late June is a deeply anxiety-inducing time for a medieval farmer. Your crops are finally growing, But a sudden, violent summer hailstorm could flatten your fields and doom your family to starvation come winter.
Right. And because the ancient liturgy poetically described John and Paul as having the power to open and close the gates of heaven, desperate farmers reinterpreted this literally.
Yeah, they began invoking the Roman martyrs specifically to manipulate the weather, begging them to keep the gates of heaven closed against devastating summer storms.
The defiant Roman stewards effectively became the magical guardians of the German agricultural harvest. It is a stunning chain of events.
It really is.
A legally taboo burial inside the walls of Rome forces an architectural cover-up, which accidentally preserves a multi-layered apartment block. That site becomes the foundation for a massive basilica fueled by an anti-pagan legend.
And then the liturgy from that basilica spreads across Europe, dictating how communities track time.
Until the feast day of those exact same martyrs becomes the permanent calendar anchor for a tragic German demographic collapse. Every piece of this corrupted hard drive is linked.
It really forces us to recognize that history is never just a passive layer resting beneath us. It's an active process of repurposing.
Yeah.
The basilica on the Caelian hill literally uses the residential walls of the past to hold up its roof. The communal memory of Hamelin uses a Roman liturgical date to hold on to its grief.
Which leaves us with a rather unsettling thought about our own era, honestly.
Right, because right now, you and I, we are burying thousands of miles of fiber optic cables and massive concrete server farms directly into the earth. And we're often cutting right through indigenous sites, ancient aquifers, and forgotten burial grounds to do it.
We are laying down the physical architecture of the cloud, basically overwriting the landscape.
Precisely. We are actively building the next corrupted hard drive. We are sealing our own titulus into the earth.
Man.
It makes you wonder, when archaeologists 3,000 years from now try to untangle our layer, what completely unrelated myths, traumas, and digital ghosts will they find tangled up in the foundations of our data centers?
That is a phenomenal question to chew on. So, the next time you're walking down the street or even just refreshing a web page, remember that the ground beneath you is never as simple as a layer cake.
Not even close.
Keep questioning the history under your feet, because you never know when digging a little deeper might uncover an ancient mega mansion, a retrofitted legend, and the echoes of a piper's song.